So you're looking into getting to historical fiction, but you don't know where to start. I got you. Here is my personal list of any historical fiction recommendations that I would suggest for beginners. So if you're into true crime and you love all the podcasts, all the documentaries, and you're looking for a book that is historical fiction but with a true crime influence, then I would say pick up Leaving Atlanta by T.R. Jones. This is a book that is set in the early 1980s, following about a 2 to 3 year time span, and this is during the time of the Atlanta child murders where multiple children were taken and went missing. And there hasn't been a true conclusion of who actually did it. And so we get the perspective of the children that are living during this time period, you know, going about their regular days, going to school, you know, playing with their friends in the midst of everything that's going on the news and what they're actually experiencing in their classrooms. This particular book has a personal significance for T.R. Jones, the author, because she actually was a child during that time period. So I really enjoyed this book. And so if you're into true crime at all and you're looking for a little introduction to historical fiction, then I highly recommend this book. Next, if you are a fan of romance and you primarily read romantic books for the most part, then I would suggest reading Next Year in Havana by Chanel Clayton. This is a dual POV following a grandmother in one POV and her granddaughter in another POV. The reason why I say specifically that this is good for romance readers because I believe Chanel Clayton wrote romance primarily before getting into historical fiction, and that seems to be her favorite genre at the moment. I think over the last at least 8 to 10 years she's been writing historical fiction books, but prior to that she was writing a lot of romance novels, and you can tell in the books that she writes, historical fiction books that she writes, there is a pretty heavy influence of romance in both POVs here, where we're following both Elisa and Marisol's love interests. And so there is a lot of romance in the story. I read another book, When We Left Cuba, that was set in the same series, and there is a high influence or intention around romance in those stories as well. So if you're looking for a kind of, again, an introduction to historical fiction, but with a lot of romance in it, then I recommend this book. So if you're looking for a book that has a pretty strong faith or spiritual undertone and also has a female protagonist that is really pushing the story forward, the narrative forward, I would recommend The American Queen by Vanessa Miller. This is a book that is following Luisa, I believe her name is, Luella. This is a book following Luella, and she is a newly emancipated person who is going forward with her family to establish something new, and she's able to establish a kingdom on American soil. She is the first and only queen ever to reign on American soil, and her husband were able to create this kingdom called the Happy Land. There is a book called Happy Land by Delene Perkins Valdez that came out earlier this year, and I haven't read that book yet, but I did read this one, and I highly recommend it for anyone who is interested in learning more about historical or little known historical figures, but has a strong faith background. Vanessa Miller is primarily or typically is a Christian author, and so there is a lot of encouraging conversations in here, especially with different people going through different trials and hardships in life and how they're able to turn to their faith and to their community for encouragement. If you're looking for a great historical remake, like you liked a book in the past when you were younger and you kind of fell off from reading for a while, as we all have probably, and you're looking for a fresher take to a beloved favorite, then I would say pick up So Many Beginnings by Bethany C. Morrow. This is a Little Women remake, and I really love this book. If you've ever read Little Women, then I would say this is a pretty good I think remix, or not adaptation, but a new take on that story. I really enjoyed it. I love Little Women. I really enjoyed this one as well. So if you know anything about Little Women, we're following 4 sisters, and this is taking place primarily after the Civil War, and we're following this family as they're establishing a newly free society of obviously of Black people, and how they're able to establish that and the different things that they go through in order to, you know, create a new life for themselves and follow their own aspirations. Each of the young women, these 4 young women here, have a dream and they want to, you know, follow through with it. So I really enjoyed this one. And again, if you like remakes, definitely check this one out. Now, if you're looking for a story that has, I'm trying to be very, I'm trying to be honest about this one. This one has a good amount of family drama, but then there's also a lot of internal struggle that happens. And so if you like books, like say like a lit fic, like if you like literary fiction books that deal with women who are, you know, going through internal things and working through internal struggles, but then also how that affects their family dynamics, their work dynamics, and ultimately how they're able to get to their goals, then I would recommend The Personal Librarian by Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray. This is obviously a New York Times bestseller. I'm sure you probably have either heard this book before or have considered reading it in the past. So we're following Belle Green, and she is a young woman who is Black, but she is passing for white. Her and her siblings and her mother are passing for white, and with her education that she's received, as well as with this, you know, aspect of her life, her passing for white, she's able to become the personal librarian to J.P. Morgan, yes, the J.P. Morgan, and be the curator of his library. He was a lover of first edition manuscripts and all the things, and so she's a person who was able to help make it the library that it is today, that we know of it as today. So if you're into those kind of stories, if you want to know more about a young woman who is struggling with different things, like I think a lot of the focus that we see in this book is her ability to obviously create this life for herself, but also the fact that, you know, we get to see what passing for white has really cost her in her life, the relationships that she can and can't have, and I think the limit of the depth that she can have in some of those relationships that she wants because of this fact of her life. So yeah, it's a deep, I think, journey of self-discovery for Belle, and that's what we experience in this book. Okay, now we're going into almost like a mystery thriller kind of vibe. I would say one of them is like heavily like a thriller or a mystery, while the other one leans more like a family drama / mystery. So it's kind of like we know the details of what happened, but then we want to figure out like the in-between of like what happened between one event and the next. Follow me. Okay, so we have The Berry Pickers by Amanda Peters. This is a story that follows a young girl who was an Indigenous girl who was living in, I believe it was Nova Scotia and Canada, but also partly in Maine. But anyways, her life completely changed when she was taken at 4 years old and somewhat adopted into a new family. Her actual family, pretty much after she left or after she was taken, never knew what happened to her. Many years go by, at least 40 years pass, and it becomes this, you know, enigma, this mystery that no one was able to solve. And we see her, which her name was Ruthie. Yep, I knew it. Her name was Ruthie and Joe. So we see Ruthie and Joe, and this happens very soon in the book, so it's not really a spoiler, but we see Ruthie, who is the young girl who was taken, and Joe, her older brother, and eventually they do, you know, meet. But there's plenty of things that happen between then and now, and we're able to see through the different ages, literally through the decades, what took place in both Ruthie's life and Joe's life, and how their family was affected during that time. The reason why I say this is kind of like a mystery / family drama is because though we know that Ruthie was taken, and we know that, you know, eventually she does live, and we know who she becomes, there is, and that's very early in the book that we find that out, there is a big mystery of the in-between of figuring out what happened between when she was taken to when we finally see her at, you know, age 50 years old. Next, we have The Frozen River by Ariel Lahone, and this is a more of like a historical mystery, I think. This is set in the early, I think it's like 1789. And we're following a woman who is a midwife, but in this time period in Maine, 1789, the midwives are kind of like the doctors, the medical examiners, the everything. And so she hears about a body that is discovered in the frozen river, and she is now trying to figure out what happened, who killed this individual, and the motive and all that's going on. There's also a couple different other events and crimes that take place that she's working to figure out, to get to the bottom of. So I did enjoy this one, and I think this is more of a traditional mystery versus the other one. So if you're a fan of mysteries at all or thrillers, then I would say both of these have an element of mystery that you probably would enjoy. Okay, next, if you're looking for a book that follows or centers female friendship, or you primarily like books that focus on female friendship, then I would recommend All We Were Promised by Ashton Lattimore. This is a pre-Civil War Philadelphia, and we're following 3 young women. One is a rebel, one's a socialite, and one's a fugitive. And we're seeing how they're able to relate to each other, to work with each other, to support one another, even though they come from very different backgrounds. One of them, who is more the rebel, she was previously enslaved. Her and her father, they left where they lived to move to Philadelphia, and they completely changed their identities and are hiding under different aliases. And that's where she's able to meet, Charlotte is able to meet this socialite and become friends with her. Then there's another person whose name is Sarah, and she is the fugitive who is essentially in Philadelphia for a short period of time, but she wants to eventually become free. I loved how, especially the relationship between, I believe it's Nell and Charlotte. Yep. Wow. I'm surprised that I'm remembering. I read this. This is one of my favorite books of 2024. So I read this almost a year ago. Yeah, almost a year ago, and I still remember the names, which is pretty cool. But I loved how Nell and Charlotte, that's kind of like the first kind of friendship that we see. And though they come from, they're both black women, but because Nell grew up free, she was always free, her family's always been free, and she is in the black elite, they come from different backgrounds and are able to relate with each other, to challenge each other, and to learn from one another. And I think that's the beauty of having a friendship, is that we don't always have to think the same way, but because we care for each other, we value each other's opinion and value where each other has come from. So I love they displayed that so well in this book. So lastly, we have fantasy, and I have 2 picks for this. One of them is more straight up fantasy with a little bit of historical aspects of it, or it's inspired by historical events or historical empire, if you will. And the other one is, like, I personally feel straight up historical fiction with a little bit of magical realism and some fantastical elements. So first up, the straight up fantasy book is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I've talked about this book so much on this channel, but I'm going to bring it up again because it is that good. So we have a young woman, Laya, and she is doing all that she can to save her brother. Her brother has been taken by the Marshals, which is like the Marshall Empire, that is currently occupying the country that Laya is from. And she is looking to do whatever she can to help them. She reaches out to a certain group, and they say, okay, we'll help you get your brother back, but you have to do something for us. You have to spy on the most dangerous person in the Marshall Empire, the commandant who runs I forgot what it's called. I think it's called I forgot the name of the academy, but runs the military academy for the Marshall Empire. She's very scary. And so she agrees to do that. And in the midst of that, we meet Elias, who is a young man who's about to graduate from this academy, but he also is trying to decide whether he's going to continue on and to become a soldier in this army or desert. So that's the pretty much quick synopsis of this book, but it is a 4-book series. This is a traditionally, historical book or historical fantasy book, I would say, straight up fantasy, but then it is inspired by by ancient Rome. So that's what I would say is the historical aspect of it. So if you love fantasy and you're curious about history or historical aspects, then I say this is a kind of good way to kind of dip your toe in there a little bit. And then this one, The Lost Queen by Sidney Pike. I would say this is historical fiction, but with a little bit of fantastical elements of it. So this is following Langordeth, and she is a young woman who is a real person. She was a real person. She was the twin sister to the man who inspired the legend of Merlin. And she was a queen in Scotland. I think this was like set in 4th or 5th, 6th century, set in 6th century Scotland. I thought this was going to be a straight up fantasy book when I read it, but then when I got into it, this was really historical fiction. This author went through great lengths to do a lot of research for this book. Her author's note at the end is like very extensive, and she is definitely committed to trying to get as much information, which is hard to do, but try to get as much information as she could about these individuals, and then embellish or add more breadth or add more girth to the story from the little tidbits that she was able to collect. So this is a very grounded story, and I definitely really enjoyed it. Obviously, as a historical fiction reader, so if you're interested in learning more about, Scotland at all, then I definitely think that you should pick this one up. So that is all for today. These are all the books that I would recommend to any person who is a beginner for historical fiction and wants to jump into the genre. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to like it if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you'd like to join the fam. And I will see you in the next one. Take care.